A Colorado man named Curtis Brooks was 15 years old when he was sentenced to life in prison without parole for a shooting death in which he didn't pull the trigger. He was involved in an attempted carjacking and theft when his friend panicked and shot and killed a man. In many countries, if you're involved in a crime and someone is killed, anyone involved in the crime is just as culpable as the person who fired the shot. That's the law. Life in prison. What's happening in today's society over the past 2 years is really not much different than what the 15-year-old Curtis Brooks did. You could argue he was just a kid and felt pressured by his peers, and when his friends came up with the idea, it was only a matter of minutes before it happened, with little time to stop and think and realize, this is wrong, and none of us should be doing this. Over the past 2 years, many people in our society's actions have become no different than what Curtis Brooks did. You stood there and watched while the world burned around you, but you didn't say anything because you were too insecure or more concerned with what your friends would think, or maybe your boss at work. The obedient always think of themselves as virtuous rather than cowardly. It's been 2 years since our governments around the world started enforcing lockdowns, which have killed hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people all across the globe. You change your Facebook and Instagram profile picture to encourage more people to stay home and save lives, when in fact staying home was what was killing many people. It's been 2 years, and we now know that lockdowns in Canada have contributed to skyrocketing rates of child and spousal abuse, with many children and their spouses being stuck at home with their abusers without any escape at all.
It's been called the second shadow pandemic, an increase in domestic violence as a result of COVID-19 lockdowns. Now, Stats Canada data confirms that 17 police agencies are seeing an increase in domestic disturbance calls.
Yeah, so Kids Help Phone has seen an increase in calls specifically around abuse, and the World Health Organization is saying that child abuse is probably the silent crisis of COVID. And how children are getting through that is very disturbing because they don't have access to safe and caring adults like teachers or coaches or other people that typically they would go to for safety.
Schools have been closed for months at a time, along with most youth sports and activities being canceled altogether. It's been 2 years, and you just sat there and said nothing, while many children suffered in silence. It's been 2 years, and we now know that child suicide rates and attempted suicides in youth across Canada have increased dramatically. There's been a 39% increase in food insecurity for kids across Canada, with 1 in 5 kids now living in poverty. There's been a 223% increase in hospital admissions for eating disorders in Canadian children, mostly young girls. It's been 2 years, and yet you still just sit there and say nothing. It's been 2 years since we've watched hundreds of thousands of businesses shut their doors and go bankrupt. Just take a walk or drive through the downtown of any Canadian city, and it's clear to see for yourself how many businesses have been shut down and how many dreams and livelihoods have been ruined forever. It's been 2 years, and yet you still just sit there and say nothing. And many people are in fact still encouraging this behavior by pressuring their local politicians to keep restrictions in place in order for them to feel safe. To the man or woman who responds to every post on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook pointing out the supposed COVID death total in their city or country, it's been 2 years. How have you not researched how they're actually counting COVID deaths?
You were in hospice and had already been given, a few weeks to live, and then you also were found to have COVID, that would be counted as a COVID death. It means that even if you died of a clear alternate cause, but you had COVID at the same time, it's still listed as a COVID death. So everyone who's listed as a COVID death doesn't mean that that was the cause of the death, but they had COVID at the time of death.
It's been 2 years, Twitter and Facebook person. How do you not know this? It's been 2 years since we started locking our senior citizens in their rooms and removing access to family visits and friends. It's been 2 years since our governments introduced these insane restrictions that have made the latter stages of life completely unbearable for many of our parents and grandparents. Yet you still sit there on your phone or keyboard encouraging this behavior to continue so you can feel safe. Your obedience is cowardly, and it's time we ended this. It's been 2 years since we were promised the vaccine was our way out of this mess by some grinning politician on TV. It's been 2 years, and 90% of Canada is now fully vaccinated, yet the restrictions and loss of freedoms have increased tenfold. How have you not figured out those politicians lied to you and sold you a false bill of goods? It's been 2 years.
At the same time, it's knowing that each of us doing our part is getting through this, because we don't get through this unless the vast majority of the population gets that first shot and then a few months later gets that second shot.
It's been 2 years that Canadians sat and watched packed football and soccer stadiums all over the world, as well as jam-packed arenas for hockey and basketball. Yet as recently as last week, every professional sports team in Canada, including the Toronto Maple Leafs and Raptors, were still competing in an empty arena, as if there's some imminent danger to someone sitting watching a basketball or hockey game. It's been 2 years, so by your logic and fear, shouldn't all those Americans who sat in those arenas and stadiums, maskless and unvaccinated, be dead by now? That's what you've typed over and over on your Twitter and Facebook, didn't you? Just wait 2 weeks, all the hospitals will be full with all these COVID-idiots in that football stadium. Well, that never happened once after thousands upon thousands of games. It's been 2 years. Are you willing to accept that you were wrong? The poet William Blake explains that the fool who persists in his folly will eventually become wise. It's been 2 years, Canada. You went along with this narrative just trying to do your part. Well, unfortunately, your time is up. If you want to keep wearing a face mask while driving alone in your car when grocery shopping, then go right ahead. If you want to continue to inject yourself with 5 more vaccines because it makes you feel safe and you want to continue to do your part, then so be it. It's been 2 years and most Canadians want our lives back. We want our children to have a normal future that doesn't include a digital identification system and multiple injections per year just to participate in society. If you want to continue to keep your head in the sand and play along with this fictional narrative just because you think of yourself as some sort of hero for doing so, go right ahead. However, the rest of us Canadians are done with it. It's been 2 years.